Please, pretend to be my fiancé, the man in the expensive suit whispered to me, a young orderly, as I changed the bedsheets. I barely had time to nod before the door to the room burst open. His wealthy grandmother stormed in, ready to unleash a scandal. But what happened next left them both speechless. Welcome to Voices of Sephora, the channel that brings you compelling stories. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. We're genuinely curious. We hope you enjoy listening to this fascinating story. Serena, or Rena, as she preferred, smoothed the fresh sheet onto the hospital bed, neatly tucking the corners under the mattress. Her hands moved almost automatically. After 3 weeks of working as an orderly, these motions had become second nature. She flattened the wrinkles, adjusted the pillow, and stepped back a bit, assessing her work. Exam room 12 was small, but bright sunbeams filtered through the white blinds, casting a pattern of light and shadow on the floor. To anyone passing by, it would be impossible to guess that this young woman in a simple medical scrub top and her hair pulled back in a ponytail was actually the owner of this facility. Serena Jackson, 28 years old, was the daughter of the well-known business mogul Marcus Jackson, who had built a network of high-end private healthcare facilities across the country, starting right here in Atlanta, Georgia. But right now, she was simply changing linens, wiping down nightstands, and delivering meals to patients. The idea to work as an orderly had come to her 3 months ago, following a tense meeting with the management staff. They had been discussing patient complaints, service issues, and high employee turnover. Rena suddenly realized she had no real concept of how her clinic truly operated from the inside. She saw reports, numbers, and charts, but she didn't see the people. Neither those who worked there nor those who came seeking help. "I want to work as an orderly," she told her father over dinner one evening. Marcus Jackson put down his fork and looked at his daughter with genuine surprise. "Are you serious?" "Completely. Kendra Bell is going on maternity leave for 3 months. I'll cover her shift. No one can know who I really am." Her father was silent for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "You've never been like the other kids in our circles. I guess that's a trait I instilled in you. Fine, but promise me you'll be careful." And so, this was her 3rd week. Rena woke up at 6 in the morning, rode the MARTA train to the clinic, changed into her uniform, and started her shift. She mopped floors, changed linens, and assisted the nurses. The staff accepted her as just a regular new hire, a bit shy but diligent. Only the chief of staff, Dr. Aaron Davis, and the administrative manager knew the truth. Rena gathered a stack of used linens and headed toward the door. The hallway was quiet. It was the post-lunch lull when most patients were resting. Her rubber-soled shoes softly shuffled on the linoleum. She was just thinking that she had time to clean 2 more rooms before the end of her shift when the door to exam room 12 swung open so forcefully it slammed against the wall. A man appeared in the doorway, tall, in his mid-30s, wearing an impeccably tailored gray suit from a clearly expensive designer. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, his tie was loosened, and his eyes showed genuine fear. He quickly glanced around, as if checking to see if someone was following him, and then rushed into the room, almost colliding with the frozen Rena. "Excuse me," he breathed, grabbing her arm. "Please, I need your help." Rena stepped back, clutching the stack of linens to her chest. Her heart started pounding. The man looked stressed, but not aggressive, more desperate. "What's wrong?" she asked, instinctively lowering her voice. "Are you ill? Should I call a doctor?" "No, no." He shook his head and closed the door, listening to the sounds in the hallway. "It's not that. God, how do I explain this? Look, my grandmother is about to come in here, and I absolutely cannot face her. Not alone, anyway." Rena looked at him blankly. The man ran a hand over his face, and she noticed his hands were shaking. "I'm sorry, I'm rambling. My name is Devon. My grandmother, she's a very persistent woman, rich, influential, and for 3 months now, she's been trying to marry me off to her friend's daughter. She arranges accidental meetings, dinner parties. She even tried to trap me into a joint trip to Europe. I've refused, I've explained, but she simply won't listen." "And how can I help?" Rena still didn't grasp what he was suggesting. Footsteps and an imperious female voice could be heard in the corridor. "Nurse, where is my grandson Devin Elliott's room? Show me immediately." Devin turned pale. He seized both of Rena's hands, making her drop the pile of linens onto the floor. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, pretend to be my fiancée, just for 5 minutes. She needs to see that I have a girl, that I'm not available, that her candidate isn't necessary. I know this is crazy. I have no right to ask this of a total stranger. But I'm desperate. She's driving me to a breakdown. Please." Rena looked into his eyes and saw not audacity or calculation, but genuine despair. This man in a costly suit, who was clearly accustomed to solving problems with money and connections, now stood before her completely helpless. And there was such sincerity in his helplessness that Rena felt a pang of sympathy. The footsteps drew closer. The voice in the hallway grew louder. "This is ridiculous! I went out of my way to visit my grandson, and you can't even tell me where his room is." Rena nodded almost imperceptibly. She hadn't even fully processed her agreement when the door burst open and a woman in her 70s practically swept into the room. She was elegant, dressed in a sharp designer suit, with an impeccable silver hairdo and a rope of pearls around her neck. Trailing behind her was a breathless nurse who threw up her hands in defeat. "Devin!" the older woman exclaimed, but then stopped short, taking in the scene before her. Devin stood, still holding Rena's hands. Scattered linens lay on the floor. The moment could have looked intimate, if not for the utter confusion on both their faces. "Grandmother," Devin exhaled, not letting go of Rena's hands. "I wasn't expecting you." The woman eyed Rena with a clear look of disapproval. "And who is this? A girl?" A silence hung in the air. Rena felt her heart hammering. She still didn't fully understand what she had gotten herself into, but since she had agreed, she had to play the part. "My name is Serena," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." "Serena is my fiancée," Devin added, and Rena felt his fingers tighten around hers. "I wanted to tell you myself, grandmother, but not in this setting." His grandmother measured Rena from head to toe, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Your fiancé," she repeated, with barely concealed sarcasm. "And where did you two meet? Cleaning the rooms?" Rena felt her cheeks flush. She glanced down at her slightly rumpled uniform, at the rubber gloves she hadn't managed to remove. "We met a month ago," Devin quickly interjected. "And yes, Serena works here. She's wonderful, kind, sincere." "Not like the girls from our circle," his grandmother interrupted. "Devin, have you completely lost your mind? An orderly? Are you really so desperate?" "Eleanor Vance," the nurse still standing in the doorway intervened. "Maybe we shouldn't make a scene in a patient's room." "Don't interfere," Eleanor snapped. "I am speaking with my grandson. Devin, stop this farce immediately. Do you realize your father would turn over in his grave if he knew you were planning to marry—" "Whom?" Rena couldn't take it anymore. "Finish that sentence." Her voice came out firmer than she expected. Eleanor Vance turned to her, raising an eyebrow. "A simple orderly. A girl with no credentials, no standing in society, no—" "I have credentials," Rena cut in, feeling the anger rise inside her. "And I work here by choice." "By choice?" the grandmother sneered. "Of course. Who wouldn't jump at the chance to snag a rich husband in a private clinic? I've seen girls like you, miss. You're all the same, circling around wealthy men, hoping to—" "Enough!" Devin stepped forward, shielding Rena. "Grandmother, you're going too far. You don't know Serena, and you have no right to judge her." "I have the right to look out for you." Eleanor's voice climbed higher. "You are my only grandson, the heir to our name, our legacy. You can't just up and marry the first cleaning lady you meet." "I'm an orderly," Rena quietly corrected. "And I wasn't snagging anyone. Devin and I—" She stumbled, unsure how to continue. The story was improvised, and she had no details. Devin caught her eye and gave a slight nod, as if to say, "Keep improvising." "We met by chance," Rena continued. "Devin was visiting a friend here. We started talking. He was kind, attentive. He didn't look down on me or judge me based on my clothes or my job. He just talked to me like a person." There was truth in those words, even if it wasn't the truth she was speaking of. In her 3 weeks of working as a simple orderly, Rena had observed how people judged each other. Doctors looked down on orderlies, wealthy patients spoke to the junior staff like servants, and only a very few, saw them as simply people doing their jobs. Eleanor Vance sniffed. What a touching story. Devon, are you truly so naive? This girl planned everything in advance. She knew who you were, knew about your position, your money, and she played the role of the humble Cinderella to— I didn't know, Rena stated firmly. He didn't introduce himself by his last name, and he didn't mention money. We were just talking. She was surprised by how easily the lie rolled off her tongue. Maybe it was because there was a grain of truth in it. She genuinely wanted people to see her as just Rena, not the daughter of the clinic's owner, not an heiress to a fortune. Grandmother, please. Devon moved closer to Eleanor Vance. I'm a grown man. I'm 36 years old. I can decide who I want to be with. You decide with your heart, not your head, she snapped. Just like when you abandoned your law practice for some architecture firm, or when you turned down a seat on your grandfather's company board. You've always been a dreamer, Devon, but you can't dream when it comes to marriage. You have to think with your head. So marriage is just a transaction, bitterness crept into Devon's voice. A contract between two families where feelings don't matter. Feelings develop over time, Eleanor said stiffly, but foolishness lasts forever. Rena stood with her arms crossed, feeling completely superfluous to the conversation. She saw the pain in Devon's eyes, the intransigence on his grandmother's face, and knew this wasn't the first time this scene had played out between them. You know what? Devon ran a tired hand over his face. We'll discuss this later. Not here, not now. We will discuss it now, Eleanor insisted, before this girl can sink her claws in deeper. Devon, I know a good lawyer who specializes in prenuptial agreements. We can— I'm leaving, Rena suddenly announced. Both of them turned to her. She picked up the linens from the floor, neatly folded them, and headed for the door. Serena, wait, Devon began, but she shook her head. I need to finish my work. Excuse me. She walked out into the corridor, feeling Eleanor Vance's eyes on her back. The nurse, who was still standing nearby, offered a sympathetic smile. Don't worry, dear, she said softly. It happens. Rena nodded and quickly walked down the hall, hearing the argument continue behind her. The grandmother's voice rose again. Devon was answering something. Rena turned the corner and leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. What in the world was that? She had agreed to a crazy request from a stranger and gotten herself entangled in someone else's family drama. And now, somewhere in the clinic, there was a wealthy, influential woman who thought she was a gold digger. Rena checked her watch. She still had 2 hours left in her shift. She sighed, straightened her shoulders, and headed for the laundry room. The work hadn't disappeared, and this strange story with Devon Elliott would, most likely, never cross her path again. Rena carried the soiled linens to the laundry room, methodically sorted them by color, and loaded the industrial washing machine. Her hands moved automatically, but the scene in exam room 12 kept replaying in her mind. She could still feel Eleanor Vance's contemptuous gaze and hear her words. A simple orderly. A hunter of rich husbands. Usually Rena didn't care what others thought, but those words stung now. Maybe it was because there was a grain of truth in them. No, not that she was hunting anyone, but that people really did judge one another by superficial signs, by job title, by clothing, and Rena herself, by choosing to work as an orderly, had wanted to understand exactly that, what it felt like to be looked down upon. She closed the machine door, hit the start button, and leaned against the wall. The laundry room was quiet and cool, smelling of detergent and bleach. Rena closed her eyes, trying to calm down. Serena Jackson? She jumped and turned around. Dr. Aaron Davis, the chief of staff, a tall man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses, stood in the doorway. Yes, Dr. Davis. She straightened up, instinctively adjusting her uniform. Didn't mean to startle you, he smiled. I just came to say we need some help on the second floor. One of the orderlies called in sick. We need to clean the rooms in the intensive care unit. Of course, I'll head up now. Dr. Davis didn't immediately leave. He looked at Rena closely, and his gaze showed an unusual concern, not just a boss for an employee, but something more personal. Is everything all right? He asked quietly. The nurse mentioned the incident in 12, said it was an unpleasant scene. Rena wanted to brush it off, to say everything was fine, but the words caught in her throat. She looked down at her hands, still wearing the rubber gloves. I can handle it, she finally said. It was just unexpected. Would you like me to speak to this Mr. Elliott? Dr. Davis's voice held a protective edge. If he was behaving inappropriately— No, Rena quickly replied. He's not at fault. Well, he is, but not in the way you think. He just asked for a favor, and I agreed. It was foolish of me. The chief of staff nodded, but still looked at her with doubt. All right, but if anything happens, you can always come to me. I know you're not just here to learn the job from the inside. You want to understand people, but sometimes people can be cruel. Rena smiled gratefully. Dr. Davis was one of the few who understood her motives, not dismissing them as a whim of a spoiled heiress. Thank you. I truly appreciate that. He nodded and left. Rena took off her gloves, washed her hands, and headed up to the second floor. On her way, she tried not to think about Devin Elliott and his grandmother, but her thoughts kept returning to the encounter. There was something in his eyes, not just fear of an insistent relative, but something deeper. Tiredness, perhaps, or the despair of a person worn out from fighting. The second floor was quieter than the first. The intensive care unit required special care and silence. Rena took a cart with cleaning supplies and methodically began to clean the rooms. The work was calming. Clear actions, clear results. Mop the floor, wipe the surfaces, change the linens. Simple and straightforward. She finished the fourth room and stepped out into the corridor when she heard a familiar voice. Excuse me, have you seen the orderly? Tall, dark hair, hasn't been working here long. Devin. He was standing at the nurse's station, clearly agitated, questioning the duty nurse, Margaret. Margaret shrugged and pointed down the hall. Serena, she's down there, in the rooms. Devin turned and saw her. His face registered relief mixed with guilt. He quickly strode toward her. Serena, please wait. I need to talk to you. She wanted to turn away, to pretend to be busy, but something in his tone made her stop. He looked exhausted. His tie was completely undone, his jacket was off and tossed over his arm. There were beads of sweat on his temples. Mr. Elliott, she began in a formal tone, I'm working, and I think we've already spoken enough. I know. He stopped a couple of steps away from her. I know I acted terribly. I dragged you into this ridiculous situation, exposing you to my grandmother's attack. But please, hear me out, just for a couple of minutes. Rena hesitated. The rational part of her said, refuse, leave, forget about him. But another part, the one that was always too curious, wanted to hear his explanation. 2 minutes, she said, pulling the cart over to the wall. I really do have work. Thank you. He breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe we can step somewhere where we won't be overheard. Rena nodded and led him to a small staff break room at the end of the hall. It had a couple of worn armchairs, a small table, and a coffee maker. She closed the door and turned to him. Talk. Devin sank into an armchair, running his hands over his face. Now, in the less harsh light of the break room, she saw the dark circles under his eyes, the tense line of his jaw. I don't know where to start, he finally said. With an apology, I guess. I'm sorry. I behaved like a total jerk. I used you without thinking about the consequences. Yes, you used me. Rena agreed, crossing her arms. And your grandmother now thinks I'm a gold digger. I talked to her, he quickly said. I explained that it wasn't true, that I asked you for help, and that you simply agreed out of kindness, but she— He trailed off, searching for the right words. She's not used to admitting fault. So you told her the truth. Rena felt a wave of relief. That I'm not your fiancé? That we're barely acquainted? Yes, and she was furious, first at me for lying, then at herself for believing it. But most of all, she's angry that I still refuse to see Crystal. Crystal being the girl she's pushing on you? Devin nodded. My grandmother's friend's daughter, 25 years old, model, beautiful, educated, from a good family. The perfect match, in my grandmother's opinion. Except Crystal and I dated a year and a half ago, and it ended not well. And your grandmother knows this? She knows, but she thinks we've both grown up and changed, that we should give it a second chance. She doesn't understand, or doesn't want to understand, that some things can't be fixed. Crystal cheated on me with my business partner. After that, the partnership collapsed, and the business suffered. He stopped, clearly not wanting to go into detail. Anyway, it was tough. Rena slowly sat down in the second armchair. The story was becoming clearer and more disheartening, and your grandmother thinks wealth and status are more important than trust. She thinks young people make mistakes, and adults should be pragmatic, Devin replied wearily. Crystal is single now, and I'm single. Our families are friends, logically, from her perspective, but not logical from yours. Completely illogical. He looked at her, and there was such exhaustion in his eyes that Rena felt unexpected compassion. That's why I panicked when I found out she was coming to the clinic. She called me this morning, saying we needed to meet to discuss important business. I knew it was about Crystal again, and a quiet knock came at the door. Rena jumped and turned around. Dr. Davis stood in the doorway. His gaze flickered from Rena to Devin and back. Apologies for the interruption, he said in an even voice. Serena, they're asking for you downstairs in the admissions office. A slight mix-up with a patient's paperwork. Rena stood up, grateful for a chance to break off the conversation. She felt herself starting to empathize with Devin, and that was dangerous. She shouldn't get involved in other people's problems. Of course, Dr. Davis, I'll be right down. The chief of staff didn't move. He was still looking at Devin, and there was something assessing in his gaze. Mr. Elliott, if I'm not mistaken, he said, we weren't formally introduced. I am the chief of staff of this facility, Dr. Aaron Davis. Devin stood up and extended his hand. Devin Elliott, very nice to meet you. They shook hands. Dr. Davis smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. I hope our employee hasn't caused you any inconvenience. Serena is one of our best workers despite her short tenure. No, not at all, Devin shook his head. On the contrary, I caused her inconvenience and came to apologize. Commendable, the chief of staff nodded. Serena, don't forget admissions. Rena nodded and moved toward the door, but Dr. Davis didn't immediately step aside. He paused on the threshold, looking at Devin. You know, Mr. Elliott, he said thoughtfully, we have very strict rules here at the clinic regarding staff interaction with visitors. We value professionalism. He paused, and respectful treatment of all employees, regardless of their position. Rena froze. There was no direct threat in the chief of staff's words, but the subtext was obvious. Don't you dare offend her. She felt both gratitude and awkwardness. Dr. Davis was defending her, but doing so as if she couldn't stand up for herself. I understand, Devin replied, and there was no irritation in his voice, only seriousness. And I completely agree. Respect for people doesn't depend on their job title. It should be a fundamental truth. The chief of staff seemed satisfied with the answer. He nodded and stepped back, letting Rena into the corridor. She quickly walked toward the stairs, hearing Dr. Davis say something else to Devin behind her. Her heart was racing. This situation was spiraling out of control. Too much attention, too many questions. Rena went down to the first floor and headed to admissions. There was indeed a minor mix-up with a new patient's forms. The nurse couldn't decipher a doctor's handwriting. Rena helped her, even though it wasn't part of an orderly's duties. She spent the next hour cleaning procedure rooms, stacking clean linens on the shelves in the laundry room, and helping deliver dinners to the rooms. She tried not to think about Devin Elliott, his story, or the way he had looked at her in the break room, but her thoughts kept returning. There was something appealing about his honesty, in the way he didn't try to justify himself or shift the blame. He simply admitted that he had acted poorly. Her shift ended at 6 in the evening. Rena changed into her own clothes, jeans, a simple white tee, a light jacket. She let her hair down, wiped off the remnants of her daytime makeup, looked at herself in the locker room mirror, and sighed. An ordinary girl. No one looking at her now would guess she owned this clinic. She left through the staff exit, which led to a small courtyard behind the building. A few staff cars were parked there, old linden trees grew, and a small smoking area with a bench was set up. Rena didn't smoke, but sometimes she liked to sit there before heading home just to get some fresh air. She was walking toward the bench when she heard a voice. "Serena." She turned around. Devin emerged from around the corner of the building. He was still wearing the same suit, but now he looked even more rumpled. The jacket was over his arm, his shirt sleeves were rolled up. "You spent the whole day here?" she blurted out. He offered a sheepish smile. "Not the whole day, about 3 hours, I think. I didn't know when your shift ended, so I decided to wait. The guard said staff exit here." Rena didn't know what to think. On the one hand, it was strange and a little unnerving. A man she barely knew had waited for her for several hours. On the other hand, there was nothing threatening about his behavior. He stood at a respectful distance, held his hands where she could see them, and made no move to come closer. "Why?" she asked. "I just wanted to apologize again. Properly apologize, not in a work setting." He paused, clearly searching for the right words. "And to thank you. You helped me when you could have just refused. That means a lot." Rena shrugged. "It wasn't heroic. It was just the right thing to do," he finished for her. He stepped closer, and she noticed he was holding a bag from a bakery. "I don't know your preferences, so I bought an assortment, pastries, eclairs, macarons. I hope you like at least something." Rena looked at the bag, then at him, and suddenly burst out laughing, the first time all day. She laughed at the absurdity of the situation, at his serious face, at how ridiculous it all was. "You think pastries fix everything?" "No," he answered honestly, "but I hope it at least shows that I genuinely regret it, and that I'm not a complete idiot, although this morning suggests otherwise." Rena took the bag. It was warm, and it smelled of vanilla and chocolate. "Thank you," she said more gently. "This wasn't necessary." "It was," Devin countered. "It absolutely was. You did more for me than many people close to me. You pretended to be my fiancé, listened to my story, and didn't immediately tell me where to go." She smiled again. There was something disarming about his self-deprecation. "Did your grandmother really leave?" "Yes. She chewed me out like a kid and drove off. But I know this isn't the end. She'll be back with new arguments, new ideas. She doesn't give up easily." "Family," Rena murmured. "Exactly." He looked at her intently. "Do you have difficulties with your family too?" Rena wanted to give an evasive answer, but instead she heard her own voice. "Sometimes. My father, he loves me very much, but sometimes that love turns into hyperprotection. He wants to shield me from the world, but he doesn't realize that by doing that, he's shielding me from life." She stopped, surprised by her own candor. Why had she told this stranger that? Devin nodded, as if understanding. "My grandmother also thinks she's protecting me from making the wrong choices, from mistakes, from people she thinks aren't right for me, but she doesn't realize that protection can be a prison." They fell silent. The evening air was cool, smelling of linden blossoms and freshly cut grass. Somewhere in the distance, the city highway roared, but here, in this small courtyard, it was quiet and peaceful. "I should go," Rena finally said. "Thanks for the pastries." "Wait," Devin took a step forward. "Can I walk you out? To the bus stop? To your car? Wherever you need to go?" Rena hesitated. Common sense told her to refuse, but something inside her wanted to continue the conversation, to learn more about this strange man who was hiding from his own grandmother and had waited 3 hours for her with pastries. "You can walk me to the subway," she said, "if you promise not to stage any more scenes with fake fiancés." He laughed, a genuine, free laugh. "I promise. One time was more than enough." They walked along the path toward the courtyard exit. Rena found herself thinking that the day, which had started so strangely, was ending even stranger. But for some reason, she felt calm next to this man. Maybe it was because he was honest, or maybe because beneath his outward success, she saw the same weariness of external expectations that she felt herself. "You know," Devon said as they stepped out onto the street, "I never even asked. Have you been working at the clinic long?" "Not very," Rena answered vaguely. "Only 3 weeks. And what are your impressions?" "It's interesting. You learn a lot about people, about how they behave when they think no one is watching." He looked at her curiously. "That sounds philosophical for an orderly's job." Rena shrugged. "Any job can be philosophical if you think about it. You're an architect, if I understood correctly from the conversation with your grandmother." "Yes," he nodded. "I once wanted to build museums and theaters. Now I mostly design housing complexes and office buildings, less romantic, but more profitable." "Do you regret it?" He thought for a moment. "Sometimes, but life is a constant choice between dreams and reality." "True enough," Rena agreed. They reached the subway station. Rena stopped at the entrance. "Well, this is it. Thanks for walking me." "Thanks for letting me." Devon extended his hand. "It was good to meet you. To really meet you, without all the pretense." Rena shook his hand. His grip was firm and warm. "You too. And good luck with your grandmother." "Thanks. I'm going to need it." She turned to enter the station, but he called her name. "Serena." She turned back. "Yes?" He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking unexpectedly uncertain. Maybe we could see each other again sometime. I could stop by the clinic, or we could—" He stammered. "I'm sorry, that sounds foolish. Forget it." Rena smiled. "Not foolish, but let's see. Life is unpredictable. Maybe we'll run into each other, maybe not." And she went down into the subway, leaving him standing at the entrance. Only inside the train, once it had started moving, did she allow herself to pull out her phone and type a message to her father. "Dad, today was a super strange day. I'll tell you about it when I get home." For the next 3 days, Rena worked her regular shift, trying not to think about the strange encounter with Devon Elliott. In the mornings, she came to the clinic, changed into her uniform, and immersed herself in the familiar routine. She shared the pastries he had given her with her colleagues in the break room. They vanished in 10 minutes, accompanied by oohs and ahs of delight. "Serena, do you have a new beau?" the orderly Margaret asked, biting into an eclair. "They don't give out treats that expensive for no reason." "Just an acquaintance," Rena vaguely replied. "He was thanking me for some help." "What kind of help?" the nurse persisted. "I helped him find the right room," Rena lied, and thankfully, the topic was closed. But thoughts of Devon still returned. She caught herself remembering his face when he stood at the staff exit with the bag of pastries. There was something touching about the picture. A rich, successful man who had waited 3 hours to apologize to a simple orderly. Though, of course, she wasn't a simple orderly, and that was the whole irony of the situation. On Thursday morning, as Rena was delivering breakfasts to the rooms, the clinic administrator, Ms. Yvonne Lee, approached her. "Serena, someone is asking for you at the front desk. A gentleman brought flowers." Rena almost dropped the tray of plates. "Flowers? For me?" "Yes. He said they were for Serena the orderly. Didn't know your last name, just your first." Her heart quickened. Rena placed the tray on the nearest nightstand and hurried downstairs. At the front desk counter stood a huge bouquet of white roses, no fewer than 50, in beautiful wrapping with a satin ribbon. Next to the bouquet was a small card. "These are for you." The desk administrator smiled. "What luck! Flowers like this are only given for true love." Raina picked up the card. The handwriting was clear and confident. "Please excuse my persistence, but I couldn't not send these. Thank you again for your help and for listening. D.E." She folded the card and tucked it into her uniform pocket. The bouquet was truly magnificent, but what was she going to do with it? Carry it home on the subway? Her colleagues would bombard her with questions if they saw her carrying something like that. "Can we put them in the lobby?" she asked the administrator. "Let the patients enjoy them. We don't have enough space in our break room." "Of course, dear, that's so kind of you." Raina nodded and returned to her duties, but all day she felt the curious glances of her colleagues. By lunchtime, the entire clinic knew that Serena, the orderly, had received a massive bouquet of white roses. Gossip traveled fast. "Serena, spill it! Who is he?" The orderly Margaret winked at her during the lunch break. "Did a patient fall for you?" "No one fell for anyone," Raina waved her off. "Just an acquaintance. He liked how I worked, so he decided to show his appreciation." "With flowers that cost 3 months of your salary?" Margaret scoffed. "Oh, come on. He's clearly got a thing for you." Raina remained silent, finishing her soup. She didn't want to discuss Devon with her colleagues, especially since she didn't understand what he was doing. Why send such expensive flowers? He had already apologized, and he had given her the pastries. That had been more than enough. The next day, Friday, the story repeated itself. This time, it wasn't a bouquet, but a basket of exotic, clearly high-priced fruits. Mango, dragon fruit, lychee, passion fruit. And another card. "I hope you like fruit more than flowers. Have a good day. D.E." Raina stood at the front desk, looking at the basket, unsure whether to laugh or get angry. On the one hand, it was sweet. On the other, it was too persistent. And most importantly, why? What was he trying to achieve? "Your admirer again." Ms. Yvonne Lee walked over. "He's persistent." "Too persistent," Raina mumbled. She took the basket and carried it to the break room where the staff could share. The fruit was gone within an hour, but Raina didn't touch any of it. Instead, she pulled out her phone and, for the first time in days, regretted not taking Devon's number. She needed to talk to him, to explain that he couldn't do this, that she was grateful, but it was too much. As the evening shift neared its end, Dr. Davis approached Raina. "Serena, do you have a minute?" She followed him into his office. The chief of staff closed the door and motioned for her to sit. "I don't want to pry into your personal life," he began carefully, "but the staff is discussing these gifts, the flowers, the fruit. They're drawing attention, and I just want to make sure everything is okay, that this man isn't harassing you." Raina sighed. "Everything is fine, Dr. Davis. It's that same Mr. Elliott. He's just overdoing it with the gratitude." "Are you sure? Because if he's causing you problems, I can speak with him, or even ban him from the clinic if necessary." "You don't need to," Raina quickly said. "Honestly, it's fine. I'll talk to him myself." The chief of staff nodded, but a look of concern remained in his eyes. "All right, but if anything changes, you know where to find me." Raina left the office and went to the locker room. She really did need to talk to Devon, but how could she find him? She didn't know his address or phone number. The only thing she remembered was that he was an architect. Maybe search online? She changed and walked out through the staff exit, then stopped dead. By the bench where they had talked last time, Devon was standing again. This time, he was dressed more casually. Jeans, a dark blue sweater, a light jacket. He looked much more relaxed than he had that first day. "You again," Raina said, walking closer. "Are you staking this place out every day?" He smiled guiltily. "Not every day. Only when your shift ends. I found out in admissions that you work until 6. That's starting to sound like stalking." She crossed her arms, but there was no anger in her voice, only weariness. "I know," he nodded. "I understand that I'm acting strangely, but I needed to see you, to talk. Properly talk, not in a rush, not between your work duties." "You have a phone," Raina pointed out. "You could have just called." "I don't have your number, and admissions said they weren't allowed to give out employee personal information. That's why I decided to come in person." Rena sighed and sat down on the bench. Devon sat next to her, leaving a respectable amount of space between them. "Those gifts," she began. "The flowers, the fruit. It's too much, Devon. People are starting to gossip, ask questions. I don't want to draw attention to myself. I apologize." He looked genuinely remorseful. "I didn't think. I just wanted to express my thanks somehow, to show that I truly value what you did." "You already showed that with the pastries and the apology. You don't need to do any more." They were silent for a moment. Devon looked out at the linden trees, whose leaves were just beginning to unfurl. "You know," he finally said, "for the last 3 days, I've been thinking about our conversation, about what you said about your father, about protection turning into a prison, and I realized you perfectly described my situation. My grandmother loves me, but her love is smothering." Rena turned to him. "Have you tried talking to her seriously? Not in the middle of a conflict, but calmly, explaining how you feel." "I have tried," he smiled sadly, "many times, but she's from a generation that believes elders know best, that life experience is more important than personal desires. For her, love is a luxury only the poor can afford. People in our circle have to think with their heads." "Your circle," Rena quietly corrected. He looked at her closely. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend. It's just how I'm used to talking. The circle I grew up in, where money solves everything, where marriages are brokered like business deals. I've always hated it, but it's impossible to escape." "Why impossible?" "Because it's your family, your blood. You can move to the ends of the earth, but they'll still be a part of you. And when you're the only heir, the only one who has to carry on the lineage, the responsibility weighs twice as heavily." Rena listened to him and understood every word. She, too, felt the pressure of her father's expectations, the need to conform to the image of an heiress, a successor. That was why she had decided to become a simple orderly for a while, to escape that responsibility, even if only for 3 months. "I understand," she said, "more than you think." Devon turned his entire body toward her. "Really? Your father tries to control your life too?" "Not control, more like protect. He's afraid people will use me, deceive me, approach me only for money or connections. So he's constantly vetting my friends, acquaintances, even my coworkers." Devon frowned. "You're an orderly. Do orderlies work somewhere else?" Rena stopped short. She had gotten too caught up in the conversation and almost spilled the truth. She needed to think fast. "I meant my previous job," she quickly said. "Before the clinic, I worked somewhere else. That's where I had those problems with colleagues." Devon accepted the explanation. He nodded and leaned back on the bench again. "So we're both kind of trapped," he observed. "You in your father's golden cage of hyperprotection, and me in the iron vice of family expectations." "Looks like it," Rena agreed. They sat in silence. Evening was falling, and the air was getting cooler. Somewhere in the bushes, a bird chirped, settling down for the night. "Serena," Devon suddenly turned to her, "can I ask you a strange question?" "After everything that's happened, there are no more strange questions," she smiled. "Why did you agree back then to pretend to be my fiancé? You could have refused, told me to leave, called security, but you nodded. Why?" Rena pondered. Why indeed? She hadn't analyzed her decision then. She had just reacted intuitively. "I saw fear in your eyes," she finally said. "Real, unfeigned fear. And I knew you weren't an arrogant type who was used to getting whatever he wanted. You were a desperate man, cornered, and I couldn't say no." Devon was silent, processing her words. "Thank you," he said softly, "for seeing that, for not judging. We all sometimes do foolish things when we're pushed against a wall." Rena shrugged. "That's normal." He looked at her with a long gaze that held gratitude and something else, something that made Rena look away. "Serena," he said, and there was an unexpected uncertainty in his voice. "I know this might sound odd, that we barely know each other, but I would really like to meet with you again. Not here, not at the staff exit. Somewhere normal. Maybe grab coffee or lunch. I could tell you more about myself, and you could tell me about you. Just as two people who have something to talk about. Raina looked at him and felt an internal struggle. The rational part said, refuse. It's dangerous. He's from a different world. You're too different. But the other, more impulsive part wanted to agree. She found him interesting and easy to be around, despite the strangeness of their first meeting. I don't know, she said honestly. It's an unusual situation. I understand, Devin nodded, and I won't pressure you. Just think about it, okay? Here's my phone number. He took a business card from his pocket and held it out to her. Raina took the simple white card with gold embossing. Elliot, Devin A., architect, managing partner, Elliot & Co. Architects. Text or call if you agree, he added. And if not, just don't reply. I'll understand and won't bother you again. He stood up from the bench, putting his hands in his jacket pockets. Have a good evening, Serena, and thank you again for everything. He turned and walked toward the courtyard exit. Raina sat, turning the business card over in her hands. He had handwritten his cell number on the back. She should have refused. She should have thrown the card away and forgotten about Devin Elliott. But instead, she carefully folded it and put it in her pocket. Over the weekend, Raina tried not to think about the business card in her nightstand drawer. She spent Saturday with her father. They went to the theater and then had dinner at their favorite restaurant. Marcus Jackson asked about her work at the clinic, and Raina shared her observations, though she didn't mention Devin. On Sunday, she met up with her friend, Tasha Mills, her one true friend who knew the truth about her double life. You're glowing, Tasha observed over a cup of cappuccino. What happened? Nothing happened, Raina dismissed. You're lying. I've known you for 20 years. Your eyes are sparkling. Is someone new in your life? Raina sighed and recounted the entire story, from the first meeting to the business card in her pocket. Tasha listened, wide-eyed. Are you serious? She exclaimed when Raina finished. That's like something out of a movie. Stranger, fake fiancé, rich grandmother. It's not a movie, Raina countered. It's my life, and it's getting complicated. So what are you going to do? I don't know. Probably nothing. Forget about it and move on. Tasha shook her head. You won't forget. I can tell by the way you talk about him. You're interested in this guy. Even if I am, then what? I can't date him as an orderly. Sooner or later the truth will come out. And then what? He'll feel deceived, just as I felt when his grandmother spoke down to me. Then tell him the truth, Tasha simply stated. When? Hey, Devin. By the way, I actually own the clinic and am a millionaire's daughter. It will sound like revenge for his fiancée stunt. Tasha considered this. You're right. It's tricky. But maybe you should just meet up, get coffee, talk. You wanted to live a normal life, to meet people who don't know about your background. Well, he's one of those people. Raina remained silent, staring into her cup. Tasha was right. Wasn't this exactly what she wanted? To meet someone who saw her as simply Serena, not the heiress to a fortune? On Monday morning, she came to work with a firm decision. She would call Devin. She would just meet him, get coffee, talk, and see what happened. But as she changed into her uniform and walked into the hallway, Ms. Yvonne Lee stopped her. Serena, you have a visitor waiting for you in the lobby. She says it's urgent. Her heart sank. Had Devin come again? She went down to the lobby and froze. Eleanor Vance stood by the front desk, wearing the same elegant suit with the same flawless hairstyle and the same haughty expression. Their eyes met. Devin's grandmother slowly walked toward her. We need to talk, she said in a measured voice, and preferably in private. Raina led Eleanor Vance up to the same break room on the second floor. Her heart was racing, but she maintained her composure outwardly. Closing the door behind them, she motioned for the older woman to sit, but Eleanor remained standing. I will be brief, Eleanor began. "My grandson has completely lost his head. He's sending you flowers, waiting for you outside the exit. The staff is talking about nothing else. It's inappropriate." Raina straightened her back. "With all due respect, that is your grandson's business. I didn't ask him to do any of this." "You didn't ask? You involved him in that pretense, and now he can't get you out of his mind. Isn't that what you were aiming for?" Raina felt the heat rising inside her. "Your grandson asked me for help. He was afraid of facing you. Perhaps you should consider why he was so desperate." Eleanor Vance's cheeks flushed. "You have no right to judge my family's relations. Devon is my only grandson, the heir." "His father passed away," Raina interrupted. "And now you're trying to live the life you think is right through Devon. But this is his life, not yours." A heavy silence fell. Eleanor Vance stared at Raina in astonishment. "You are bold and far too educated for your position. Who are you really?" At that moment, the door opened. Dr. Davis appeared on the threshold, followed by Devon. "Grandmother, what are you doing here?" Devon asked sharply. "I asked you not to interfere." "I am protecting you from foolishness, as always." Dr. Davis stepped between them. "Eleanor Vance, you are putting pressure on our employee. That is unacceptable. Serena Jackson, you may return to work." "Serena Jackson?" The confusion in the grandmother's voice was evident. "Why is the Chief of Staff addressing an orderly by her full name?" Dr. Davis exchanged a look with Raina. Eleanor Vance caught the silent communication. "Something is wrong here. What are you hiding?" Devon frowned, shifting his gaze from his grandmother to Raina. Raina closed her eyes. The moment of truth had arrived. "I'm not just an orderly," she said quietly. "I own this clinic. I'm Serena Jackson, Marcus Jackson's daughter." The silence was deafening. Devon froze. Eleanor Vance opened her mouth but made no sound. "I've been working as an orderly for the last 3 weeks," Raina continued, "filling in for an employee on maternity leave. I wanted to see how the clinic really works. No one knows, except for the Chief of Staff." "You," Devon took a step back. "You're wealthier than me, and you kept silent. Just as you kept silent when you asked me to pretend to be your fiancée," Raina shot back. "You didn't tell me who you were then either." "That's not the same thing. I asked for a favor, and you consistently lied." "I didn't lie. I was just working. Changing sheets, mopping floors. It was all real." Eleanor Vance finally regained her speech. "Serena Jackson, Marcus Jackson."